So everybody, please welcome Peter Eisner.
Thank you. Does this work? Yeah. So that's me. I'm from the Debian project. So I'm biased in obvious ways. So if you have experience with other distributions and what they're already doing that I don't know, please contribute. So what's the Linux distribution? Just so we're clear what we're talking about. So I think what most of us spend most of our time on right now is integrating really open source software into some system that works well together. And we have policies, file system standards, and a bunch of other things like that. So that is what we're currently doing. I think what actually started more is to actually get the software to the user. Right now that's pretty easy because everyone has internet, but it used to be more difficult. And actually the original Linux distributions didn't have a lot of sort of policies or a nice integration. They just had some binary toolbars perhaps and put them on a medium and ship it to the user. So that is another task, and to some degree the third task of Linux distributors is to sort of be the implementers or the guardians of freedoms that various organizations such as the Free Software Foundation or the Open Source Initiative have defined. They put them on paper or on the internet, but it's actually the distributors who have to or should follow that and actually provide those freedoms to the user. So, and then the other part of the talk is what is a cloud, and there's a bunch of definitions around them. So this is my definition. So this is something I pulled together somehow. So it's provisioning of services hosted on shared resources over the internet. So there's a couple parts here. One is sort of the provisioning, which is the same as sort of distributing, perhaps, and the hosting on shared resources. So there has this virtualization and stuff like that goes into that, and then the whole thing happens over the internet. And then there's also these things called private clouds, which is then not over the internet. So you basically have the provisioning and shared resources and virtualization in your own data center, perhaps. It's called a private cloud. So so this might have been the first Linux distribution, maybe 15, 20 years ago. So that's what people did back then, right? They took binary toolbars and put them on floppy disks and then sent them around. Or the alternative, perhaps, is that sort of thing. I'm actually not old enough to remember these, but so that's what you did back then, right? You just sort of downloaded over the telephone network, and then you wanted to install Linux or some good operating system locally. So that, as I said, that was sort of the task of the early Linux distributions to get the software out there. Then what people started doing is put these things into disks, I guess, into boxes like this, and a bunch of other ones, sort of like this, that you can recognize. And put manuals in there, and then you can order them, you can ship them around, or you can buy them in the shops and bookshops. I don't think that actually exists anymore to a large degree. You can probably still order them, but I don't think you can buy them in bookshops and stuff anymore. And then as the stuff grows, then you use these kind of media, and they kept growing. First it was CDs, and now it's like this many CDs, or you use DVDs, and then there's like 5 or 6, I think, for that. Well, I guess you can use Blu-ray now, and it's just one. So, but this is just accumulating, but it doesn't really sort of help people, because the latest sort of devices that we have now, they don't actually have CD drives anymore, right? They're small netbooks. So how do you install these? Well, I think you probably do it with USB sticks, but you can't actually, well, you could, but you don't really sell or distribute USB sticks, right? People buy them themselves, and then they download an ISO image on them and boot from that and delete the thing. So it's just kind of complicated actually nowadays if you don't have a CD drive anymore. So that's sort of where we're now, and certainly this will continue to exist, right? Because you still need to install your desktop or your laptop. There's still people in other parts of the world who don't have broadband internet, and they just want to put some learning software on their school computers, and then so they have completely different infrastructure. But what we have now mostly is this at home, right? This is DSL, so we can just basically download everything. We don't need any media anymore. But then you have these sort of things, and so how do you install these? Obviously, people do that, and there are solutions for that, but it's all ad hoc made up. And you don't. These mostly have CD drives and USB, so you could boot them yourself, right? And then people will write like some automation for that for their own data center. But so what the cloud idea now is actually, this is not your own data center, this is Amazon or Rackspace or something. They, first of all, you don't go there to install yourself. And they do give you sort of pre-made images, you can just install that there, but then that's what they tell you you can use. Of course, you can also install your own, but you have to sort of make that up yourself again. Or another thing that's sort of popular right now is various virtual blocks that I want to sort of run locally. And how do you install these? Well, I think the way it works right now is actually you download the ISO image and sort of mount the ISO image in that thing, and you boot it up as a regular operating system, which seems kind of stupid actually, because you can maybe you should just be able to download VirtualBox images and just have it. That obviously exists because you can just put it up, but maybe that should actually be sort of something a Linux distro would actually just give you as sort of a primary product instead of an ISO image. Because it's installing these sort of things locally, you fire a VirtualBox and you download the thing, you mount it in, you boot it up again, and then you sort of have it installed, installing the software again. And so that seems kind of ridiculous. It takes half an hour, and maybe you should just be able to download these things and set up in 1 minute. So there are some solutions for that. So first you make up something yourself. Like every data center probably has something like you have images, and VMware sells something, or make something else. So there's a bunch of things available, but it's just sort of completely diverse. Some interesting sort of approaches that are also free software and somewhat well integrated with Linux distributions. For example, comes sort of from the Debian world, but they also support other operating systems. FAI is fully automated installation. If you want to check that out, that's the URL. That sort of works that way. You set up a server and put some images and configuration down, and you boot up all the machines, and they fetch the stuff via DHCP and TFTP and so on and so on. But that works maybe for your own data center, but it doesn't really help you if you want to put stuff in the cloud, because you can't put your own DHCP server out and these sort of things. So it doesn't really work. So, as I mentioned, maybe that's sort of a new idea to think about now. Instead of, or in addition to just putting out ISO images, why not just sort of distribute in some way? It needs to be figured out, obviously, to just have sort of VirtualBox images or some standard. Problem is there are no standards really for that, so that needs to be worked out. But why not distribute sort of VirtualBox images as when you make a release? For example, you can download them, put them on the machine, and set up in 1 minute. Or do some, instead of downloading images of various kinds, you just have some kind of servers integrated in your Linux distribution offering website, something. You say, well, I want a machine, and put it there. That's where it should go, right? That's sort of the promise of the cloud. You can be up in a minute. You obviously have to set up, an account with Amazon and make sure you can pay them and so on. But once you have that, you can just say, well, this is what I want, put it there. And it doesn't. And this actually exists. So this is actually, I don't work for Ubuntu. This is just something I found. So, and this is pretty much actually what this is. And this, I think, is where things are going to go. So this is. I think it's actually called the Ubuntu Enterprise Cloud or Ubuntu Cloud. it's based on free software, and I'll tell what it is later. And this is basically how it works, right? You install this sort of management thing, and you set up an account with Amazon, or whatever. And or you can have a private cloud, and then you just have a sort of web interface, and you just sort of want this, and I want a new instance. Well, you can't really see that. I want a new instance. It's that name, and you set up some access key or some password, and do some pre-configuration, and say, well, oh, that's my machine. And that works. And I don't know if anyone else actually offers that right now, but I think that's sort of where things are going to go. So, anyone know this? So problems I mentioned is, well, there are some emerging standards, you could say, but there's no real standard. This is an image format that you can sort of deploy or something like that. There are some leading vendors, right, like Rackspace or Amazon or well-known, that sort of are defining this, and presumably in a few years down the road, some standardization effort will come out of that. We don't know right now. There are some libraries around, like libvirt, for example, that can abstract that away somehow, and this is actually used also with this Ubuntu and various other pieces that abstract that away. But obviously, when the next vendor comes out, you have to adjust it. There's still some degree of locking. So the other thing, there's a bunch of software out, also free software that can manage all that, right? To actually put it there, to query what's there, manage the whole thing, to do monitoring. There's a bunch of things being emerging now. But they're also out there as typical, right? There's one website, there's another website. You can put them all sort of together and download them and try to fit them together. And, that's a lot of work. And so as I mentioned in the beginning, so Linux distributions ought to be integrated on that. And that's surely already happening, but needs to do more of that should happen. Okay. You can just say, I download the latest of X, and it has all the software, just click around and have something. So, and it's not going to be easy, but that's I think where things are going to go. Another problem, I think, with most of this is these are all web applications. Packaging of web applications has traditionally been a problem for various technical reasons, and people are sort of by now afraid of them because they have security problems and this and that. So packaging the web applications is a bit of an underlying problem there, perhaps. So here are some links that contain other links to interesting ideas about this. So this eucalyptus thing is the sort of the leading, I would say, sort of the leading, most popular provisioning management software, I suppose. That's actually what runs this sort of Ubuntu cloud thing. And that's open source. You can download that yourself, actually set up this whole thing yourself. And, you just need to staff it, and you have the same thing. And there are two blog posts that I found interesting. They have works of 11 open source cloud computing projects to watch, which contains links to other sort of software that support this. And here's another interesting blog post if you want to follow a test information. So that's part one of this. Any questions so far? Okay. So the second part of this is the Linux stuff. So to some degree, right, Linux is now leading server operating system, leading embedded operating system, probably. Desktop's been always a bit of a problem, and every year was the year of the Linux desktop. And about 2 years ago, I think 2008 was sort of, I think, when the Linux desktop was actually there, when all these netbooks came out, right? Most new netbooks had some Linux variant on it, and then 2 months later, they all switched back to Windows. So that was sort of the peak of the Linux desktop. But actually, Linux desktop is here now, but it's not what we really perhaps hoped for. It's because it looks like this now. And that is, for those of you who don't recognize it, that's Google Chrome OS. based on Linux, and if you go through the checkboxing, it's like all free and open and everything. But it doesn't actually contain any software, because all of these sort of applications that they put there are just websites, basically, right? That is, of course, the way Google wants to go, and then that's not because they want to. Maybe it's because they are evil, but they claim they're not evil. So I guess you can't really see this. This is Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo Mail, Google Calendar, Google Reader, Google Docs, YouTube, Picasa Web, it's a picture application. There are a bunch of social webs that I don't recognize so much. To-do list, some calculator. One of the calculators is actually local. Some books, chess, Facebook, Twitter. So that's the applications of the future, I suppose. And so this is obviously Google's way of the way they think things are going to be. But if you look around, maybe you give a Linux desktop to some family member, and I've done that, and they started using it without any problems. And that's not because LXDE is so the most user-friendly thing in the world. That's just basically because what they use is Firefox and OpenOffice, basically, right? And then, so even if you're not sort of Google, this is what people out there are actually using, not the hackers that have the eye and the terminals and compilers. And this is what people are actually using. So this is where things are going to go. But where does it actually leave Linux distributors? Because what you actually ship to the user now is basically just the frame around this, right? And then you don't have any control over what these things are. And so where does that leave us and the sort of goals we have, right? We don't have anything to distribute anymore except the box around it. We have nothing to integrate. We have no control over any of the freedoms that we were supposed to enforce or implement or provide. So here, those problems basically. You have server-side software that is not free, usually. There are sites where the software is technically free, but there are some other ones because they tell you, well, this is the software, it's free, you can download it and do it yourself. But maybe the hosting is not free. I don't know what could that mean, but because they can tell you this is the source, but you don't know if that's actually the source they're running, or if they have any extensions in there, or not. You don't know what's happening to your data, and even if they say, well, we protect your privacy, this and that, as you all know, there's always leaks and this and that, and they change the policies and so on. And there's no open source community in the sense, there's no peer review of things that are going on. You don't really have good feedback mechanisms. They just share bug reporting, fixing sort of thing. It's not strictly necessary, to have a free software project, but it's still sort of recognized as a component that you sort of have this software engineering methodology, I suppose, around this open source idea, and you don't really have any of that if all you use is Facebook and Gmail. So how could this be addressed? So first of all, we need more of free web services, because there's Gmail, it's not free, but a lot of people use that. There's no equivalent of that. It's free software. Of course, there are some web application, web mail applications, but they're not really nice, right? A lot of software needs to be written. And yesterday, actually, there was a talk, might have been actually here or in some neighboring room by the Mozilla folks. They said that the web is inherently hackable because you have the source code and everything. You have the source code basically. That's true to some degree, but I don't think it's actually really true. Because of course you have the source code, but have you actually looked at the source code of complex web application. You might as well argue, well, you can hack anything because you can reverse assemble it. That doesn't help. And even if you can hack it, maybe it's not legal. So there's just a bunch of new software that needs to be written to fit into what people want to use. There's some things that are already going in that direction. Identica is the Twitter replacement or alternative, for example. OpenStreetMap is well known, of course. There's a Google Maps alternative, perhaps. So new things from KDE's own cloud, which is more of an initiative right now than actually the product. But they are thinking of ways to make their software accessible. And there needs to be just a bunch of more things in that area. We don't have any sort of web office type things, for example. And obviously, that would be a huge job, so it's not going to happen in the next 3 months, supposedly. So think more of what you can do to not replace, but to have alternatives to, say, Google instead of alternatives to Microsoft. Because that was sort of the big sort of goal throughout the 90s, perhaps, everything that Microsoft or these sort of companies needs to have a free replacement. And operating system, that's done. There's the Office, that's done more or less, and a few other things. So that's what people sort of aim for. That's kind of finished right now. Obviously, there's quality issues and various things like that, but it's kind of done now. But in the meantime, actually, this whole new field is open of web applications that are driven by mostly Google and other things, other companies, and there's no real credible alternatives to much of that software. So those are good starts. So the second, we need some kind of free hosting model, and that's very hard to figure out how to actually do that. So let's think, if I am a user of free software, and I want to make use of my freedoms, and I can download the source from the original author. I can download the packaging, I can rebuild it myself, I can do changes and then use those change versions. That's all the things we do, right? But how do you do that with a web service? Even if you have a free one, of course, the software needs to be free first of all, so you can actually look at it. And then how do you, let's say you have OpenStreetMap and you want to make some change. You don't like the way parameters and change the colors. That's reasonable. So how do you do that? You can't go to OpenStreetMap and go there and check the source code that's actually running and then make changes there and then have it hosted there. It doesn't work, right? So it's, you can get the source code perhaps, and you can get the data down from them. Then you need to basically do the whole hosting yourself. It's obviously feasible. It's not sort of the same idea that you can just have the same software, rebuild it, and have it running unchanged. You need to set up your own, myopenstreetmap.org and do your things there. And obviously, that doesn't scale if 100,000 users want to make their own changes and merge them back together or something like that. You'll have 1,000 OpenStreetMap clones. So I don't know how that's actually going to work, but it's something. There are possible ways to do that with virtualization. You could have OpenStreetMap, for example, could have a virtualization hosting of alternative branches, let's call them, and then just sort of click around, make the changes, upload them, and then they have this in the subdomain. I'm not sure that helps, but I don't know, that needs thinking. There's a sort of example that is not really addressing this completely, but sort of an idea of a community hosting, hostsharing.net is a German ISP, I guess. They provide DNS and workspace and this sort of thing. But it's a non-profit association, and you can sort of become a member there, and then you sort of join the sysadmin team and do sort of join in there and run the thing as a community to some degree. So that could be useful to sort of draw experiences from, but as I said, this is very unclear how that can actually work. So the next thing is some sort of the whole issue of data. which is never a problem if you have a local installation. With the traditional way of using software, you have the software on your own machine, and you worry about, is the software free, and then kind of change it. But the data is always there. And sometimes it's in the format that you don't like. You always have the source that reads the format so you can access that. But if the software is actually deployed somewhere else, and the data is there, and you can't necessarily get to that. So there needs some sort of a policy or some ways to can you A, check what's happening to your data, and B, actually get your data out of there to use it in a different context, for example. And so there needs some kind of, well, it's, again, depends on how this hosting works out. You can't give every user SSH access to that box and let them check the logs of what's happening to their data. But ultimately, as a user, that's what I would like, but it's very impractical to provide that. Data dumps are actually already happening. You can get data dumps from all of these sort of things. For example, download what the data is in it and almost separated values from that, for example. And there is this notion in the GPL, for example, when you need, the GPL requires you in some circumstances to provide the source code to the recipient of the software. And it has this notion of preferred form for modification, right? You can't just give them some random misformatted, pre-built, binary, semi-compiled version. You need to actually give them the source that you were using to, or a reasonable person, I suppose, would use for modifying the source. The same could apply here, potentially, that you need to provide access to the data in some preferred form. So you can't just give people binary dumps of your internal data format, but you need to maybe some recognized format. So that is pretty easy to define, and I think people are already using doing that. So that's pretty simple part of this whole exercise here. And the last thing to think about is this licensing a licensing that sort of enforces these issues here. And there is there's already a license that some of you will know. It attempts to do that. It's somewhat controversial, but I think it sort of does the job for a lot of cases. It's the AGPL, the FARO General Public License. And that basically says it's a GPL plus if you provide this software as a web service. I'm sort of summarizing, but it basically says it's GPL plus if you provide this software as a web service and you change it, you need to make the changes available for download over a network. So, or a written offer to ship it or things like that. So and that essentially gets the job done. If you think about something like maybe Identica, if you had written Identica, right? I can't read that actually back there. 15 minutes, okay. If you had actually written Identica and then someone took it and actually hosted it and made some changes, they would be required to put the tarball on their website and download that. I think that makes quite a bit of sense, but there are some practical problems that have been mentioned. For example, what if you use some AGPL licensed software to implement or change a mail server, SMTP server? How would you make an SMTP server offer code for download? No one knows the answer to that because the license doesn't say that. You have to either, you could put a link in the SMTP welcome message, but that doesn't really make any sense. Right? It doesn't actually in practice help users. So, but so the Free Software Foundation has actually approved this. So and some significant projects or products are using that. So I think that's the way sort of things are going to go. Potentially, how this was like 10, 15 years ago when sort of this free open source software took off, everyone wrote their own license because they thought, this is the best way to actually enforce what I want. And over time, this has consolidated. And maybe we're already consolidated now, or maybe there's going to be more things coming up. Or maybe no one cares if none of this is going to happen. It's of course also possible. But, so look for some licensing issues there. So now I think actually some of these things are not going to sort of be implemented in say Debian or Fedora anytime soon. It's difficult to arrange, make decisions on policies and licenses and hosting and so on. So I think this would, be opportunities for commercial vendors of Linux distributions and so on. Same way, early Linux distributions, at least many of them were commercial vendors, right? That's what, the way Red Hat and SUSE got started. They assembled software and packaged it a little bit, and then they charged for that, to give that to you, right? You paid, I don't know how much it was, like some 50 euros. Other currency, actually, back then. So, to get that box, and over time, this was sort of commoditized because you had, broadband download, and now you just download things, and you can't really charge for that anymore, and now it's all open, SUSE, OpenBits, and Fedora, and so on. The same thing could happen here, that some vendors in Ubuntu, Canonical is essentially doing that already to sort of define some of these things and then make things happen and charge people for it. And over time, as we go on, there could be completely free, community-driven alternatives to that appearing as soon as these sort of things are resolved or someone has an idea about that. So this is the abbreviated version of the free software definition. And this is from the 80s actually. This is what we've been using so far. So this is the foundation of the open source definition and the free software guidelines and so on. All this sort of comes from that. And so this will still work, I think. If you want to. Let's think about a web service. You want to have the freedom to run it, you want to have the freedom to change it. There's some problem here, you don't want to have the freedom to change it and actually redeploy that changed version in the same environment. As I mentioned, this is very difficult to do right now. You can redistribute it, host it yourself. You can distribute whatever you change and so on. So this is still valid, but I think there's some additions to that should be thought about if people are thinking about that. So this is sort of an idea here. The issue of data is very important. And I think that it was actually at FOSDEM many years ago that Tim O'Reilly was actually having a keynote, and he was sort of going on about the control of data is going to be important. And back then this was kind of, yeah, but actually now it's more current than ever. So, I don't want to say, this is the fourth item here because I don't want to be presumptuous and sort of redefine the software definition right now, but I think this somehow needs to be integrated into the various licensing policies and various things like that. And I don't think anyone has really addressed that in a universally recognized way right now. So here are some links. It's a nice blog entry by, is he here? Joachim Bleidner? No. I haven't seen him. No, okay. It's a very nice blog entry where he actually went through various sort of freedoms and rights he would like to have, and then compared various services like Facebook, Identica, and email, and things like that against that. And actually, this well-known person had a talk, Freedom in the Cloud, on Friday, actually, and I've not seen it, but obviously it's kind of the same idea. And I checked this morning, the video wasn't up yet, but there was a link video coming. So it'd be very interesting to look into it. If you just Google for this exact, I guess, I don't know if you're allowed to Google it anymore now after hearing this, but if you want to search with the free search provider of choice for this, you will find it. It'll be very interesting. As I said, I've not seen it. So to conclude, this, you can just ignore that because other people will do it, but ultimately this will make Linux distributors marginalized, perhaps, or other people will do it in ways you won't like because they will not use the same sort of standards of freedom and integration and so on. So think about what in your project and so on what we work on. So how can you take all this cloud software and maybe write new cloud software and integrate it to make it into a nice package that you can then ship to your users in the way they would expect it now or certainly in a couple of years from now. And think about new ways to distribute software instead of shipping ISO images. And, you download the ISO image, burn it on a CD, install, then you throw the CD away. That's ridiculous, right? So think about new ways to distribute software, and think about freedom in the cloud. Maybe look at a talk about even modeling, or think about new ways to augment the definitions of freedom that you use for yourself. So. And as Linux distributions, I think we should be at the center of this drive. So that's all I have. Questions? There's one question.
The Eucalyptus project, yes. I suppose its purpose is to install virtual machines from scratch. Is there much similarity between it and the spacewalk?
Between that and what?
And the spacewalk?
I don't know that so much. So the question was, is Eucalyptus similar to spacewalk? I don't actually know spacewalk. So what does that do?
What you were doing
yeah, so this is the problem with FOSDEM. So yeah, I don't know. This is something to figure out and blog about afterwards. What the Eucalyptus actually does is this, what I, is kind of the screenshot of what it's into is basically a web interface to say, I want this sort of machine and I want to install it to A, Amazon, or B, my private cloud, or in the future perhaps other things.
Yeah. I think spacewalk is sort of a finer granularity that they'll roll out maybe different packages and so on, but you can see that there could be sort of crossover between the two. Certainly
there's going to be 15 package managers initially and maybe 2 left. It's all starting. Yes?
I was with Cisco guys 3 days ago, and they said to me that there is an NIST group working on a definition, an exact definition of what is a cloud. Is there a work between the community and NIST in order to set the definition as a standard?
Which NIST were you referring to?
I don't have the right reference. I think I could give it to you, but apparently there is a working group in order to define exactly as a standard what is cloud.
You mean like APIs for deploying cloud servers and things like that? Yes, so the question was there's a working group apparently to define what a cloud is. So there are standardization efforts going on. People say that the IETF and so on. And think about ways to standardize various interfaces to these services. So this is work going on and to be followed. Yes, it's all happening right now, so that's why I'm talking about this here, so you can look for it. Other questions? Okay, then thank you.